Welcome to Leadership Lessons. My guest today is Mark Dance. Mark is the Director of Pastoral Wellness at Godstone. And Mark, we're grateful for you and your ministry. And thank you for taking the time to join on Leadership Lessons today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Dr. Gray.
So our goal here is to help leaders to lead more effectively, and part of that has to do with much of your work at Godstone. But take a minute, if you would, just introduce yourself. Tell us anything that you think that we ought to know. Folks in Kentucky should know about you.
Well, thank you. Well, first and foremost, I'm a husband of Janet for 34 years. She's a PK, I'm a DK, and so it's a match made in heaven. We met in college, have a couple of adult kids, and we just moved to Dallas. I mean, like a week ago. But I was born here and raised near Dallas, and so it's kind of homecoming. She's from San Antonio, and so Godstone's also kind of a friend to everyone, right? It's like Switzerland in the SBC, and everybody loves Godstone, so it's great to be here. But I pastored churches for about 30 years and planted a church in East Tennessee in the 90s when everybody named their kid Peyton. And then I pastored a church in Conway, Arkansas, Second Baptist Conway, 14 years, and a little church where I was going to seminary. So a couple of interims, just finished a couple of weeks ago, an interim in Tulsa before we moved here. But 7 years ago, I had an opportunity to pastor pastors with Lifeway. Dr. Rayner asked me to start Lifeway Pastors, and that kind of started something that's still going even today.
Well, I remember that Lifeway Pastors, and you always send out items. In fact, I don't think I was pastoring. I think I was probably already with the convention at that time, but sure appreciate things that you were sending out. But I never made that connection with you. Well, you mentioned Godstone, and so Godstone is on the placard behind you, and that's where you're currently employed. So a lot of our folks will know what Godstone is, but if you would take another minute and just kind of describe Godstone or tell us what that is.
Yeah, I'd love to. Even though I'm new here, everyone knows that Godstone has insurance and retirement and investments. But what's interesting is why they started 100 years ago was to help retiring pastors and their widows that needed help with just paying bills, getting by. Some of them today, we're still serving with mission dignity. Thousands of retired ministers, missionaries, pastors that have served well but could use some help, and they just broke another record with people just in churches, conventions, generously given to mission dignity. So that's a lot of fun. And so they've been helping with physical and financial health for 100 years. And the new president and CEO, Hans Dilbeck, hired me to come to Oklahoma Baptist Convention a couple of years ago. And we were serving pastors together. And neither of us knew the sovereign surprise that would be him leading Godstone and him asking me to come with him to serve pastors through this great ministry. And so, we just got here and we're still learning a lot about Godstone and how they're serving pastors, churches, ministries, hospitals, schools, etc. It's pretty vast. It's a big learning curve.
Well, Hans's predecessor, O.S. Hawkins, just did incredible work in his role, and Hans is just a top shelf guy. And Mark, everyone that knows you just says the same thing. You made an interesting statement just now, and before I get into questions with you, you mentioned a sovereign surprise. Right now, lots of pastors and church leaders, man, are just trying to figure out, am I in the right place? Am I where I need to be? And you're describing something as ministering where you were, and yet God just opened up something. What would you say to the guy that's trying to figure out, do I need to stay here or need to go somewhere else? Any just quick, simple advice for determining and figuring out calling?
Yeah, no, the quick, simple is not easy by any means, but before you take a directional decision, just go old school fasting and prayer. Don't take a new position, an important relationship connection, or any big moves before spending time in fasting and prayer. And I'll be honest with you, I don't like to fast. But before I went to Lifeway, before I came to Godstone, before I got married, I spent some time in fasting, and it just helps you hyper focus, and God brings clarity in those seasons.
Well, I appreciate that counsel and appreciate you. So your current role is you are director of pastoral wellness at Godstone. And so tell us about that ministry and what made you interested in being a pastor to pastors.
Yeah, so the entry into the pastoral ministry with Godstone was Dr. Rayner asked me to come and start it, and I had been serving as a Lifeway trustee. I was pastoring in Arkansas, served as a trustee and a trustee officer, and got a good look under the hood for 8 years, and saw the potential there, and started to look for a strategy. And is the strategy that we're developing is, of course, new, but at the same time based on some proven principles that have worked, and we're still working those out. But basically, it's going to mostly be on the prevention side of pastoral care, helping them like what we're going to be doing in Kentucky next month. You guys are on the front lines of that. You're wanting me to come and talk about pastors taking care of themselves, managing their homes and their lives, as well as their churches. So state conventions are huge partners in the prevention side as well as the intervention side. But honestly, Lifeway and Godstone aren't, positioned to do a lot of the downstream strategy. But we can partner with ministries that do that well, so that when we find the pastors are in need of clinical counseling or something, intervention on their life or their marriage, we can have some curated solutions for them to help kind of be that that trusted voice to help them know what to do when they're not sure what to do.
Sure.
And so the other places, state conventions, seminaries, associations, these pastor advocates have been doing this for years, for decades, for centuries, and some of them for a couple of centuries anyway. So we're looking at partnering with our Southern Baptist partners, not inventing a bunch of new stuff for people to buy into, if that makes sense.
It does. I've heard Hans say, or Dr. Gilbeck say the exact same thing, that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but just trying to find ways to work together. If you think about resources that you envision Godstone offering, and maybe resource isn't the right word, maybe an approach to this pastoral wellness ministry, what are some things that you kind of have on your radar that you'd love to see happening through your work with Godstone?
Yeah, some of the things that we have on our radar are we're having conversations with seminaries about having some things like a Godstone Day, where we can help them with some of the more practical matters of ministry that are in our job description. That word manage is in there twice. Yep. So we've been helping people manage their health and their finances, and we can have some people on site to help them with that, because let's face it, pastors don't have the best reputation at managing their money and preparing not just for retirement but for today. And this is personal for me, because when I went to seminary straight out of college, I had a business degree thanks to my pastor, Paul Powell, who would eventually become a Godstone president. But he said if I was to do it over again, I would get a secular major in college if I knew I was going to seminary. So I got a business degree, came out of there, and made about the dumbest business decision I've made in my life. Right out of college and right into seminary, I bought a VCR because I had to have one, and I charged it with my Montgomery Ward's credit card.
Mark, you've just used a whole lot of phrases there that a lot of folks have no idea.
As a dinosaur.
You said VCR, you said Montgomery Ward,
yeah,
and then you said charged it.
That's it, man. I'm old and stupid. And so I came out of there, I paid for that thing twice, because of the interest. And so I was engaged to Janet, who had more sense than me, and I had just enough sense to listen to her. And she said, what if we don't do that? Because that's what pastors generally do. They serve, give everything they've got, but at the end of their ministry, they're broke. So if we live within our means, in other words, live within your means,
Sure.
And then you're on the other side of compound interest. And I ran into a Guidestone guy that gave me some sound, simple advice about saving some every month, and I was making a whopping $1,000 a month, so I had extra, you know. And I I just decided to do it differently because my wife and I got on the same page early. And if we could help them when they're young in their 20s and 30s, and most of the ministry events that I do are geared toward, or I help the organizations that invite me to gear them for younger ministers and their spouses, so that we can prevent some of the pain that comes with bad decisions later on.
Well, thank you, brother. So if you think about the biblical justification, so there's not a first I'm reading through First Timothy right now. There's the office of the pastor elder, there's the office of deacon, but there's really no office for denominational worker, for Guidestone worker. What's in your mind, the biblical justification, and not necessarily justification, but the biblical impetus for the work that you're doing in pastoring pastors?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because I had a little bit of identity crisis when I went to Lifeway.
Sure.
I've been a pastor since I was 22, and I was almost 50 when I went there. And I was like, "Am I still a pastor?" And then I remembered Barnabas,
Mm-hmm.
and Barnabas helped start churches, so as did Paul. But in between those churches, if people ask them, "What do you do for a living?" they wouldn't hesitate. "I'm a pastor." And sometimes they were pastoring pastors, sometimes they were pastoring churches. Most of the time they were doing both. And, we still, as Dan Garland likes to say,
Yep.
got the stink of the church on us. If we're out there in pulpits and we're helping on the front lines of churches, we can't determine, Dr. Gray, we can't determine our calling based on org charts.
Right.
This is a calling, gifts and calling that are irrevocable. So I've not been a pastor any less of a way. Neither are my denominational brothers and sisters if they're not on a local church staff.
Thank you for mentioning Dan Garland. And anytime you mention Dan Garland in Kentucky, your stock value will go up. And as Dan Garland affectionately like to say, when he left the ministry to go to work at Lifeway, his mother said, "You're gonna be a Bible salesman." And so he's well known and much loved here. And Mark, thank you for your answer and your service to pastors. I would only add the Lord Jesus. I'm thinking about in Mark chapter 6, where the disciples reported back from their ministry, Jesus just ministered so much to them. And in many ways, that's what you're doing in serving leaders. That not every leader has someone to care for him. But you're doing that. So thank you for your good work. Mark, what have you noticed? How has COVID impacted pastoral wellness?
Well, I tell you, COVID's hurt a lot of people, but it's positively impacted my ministry. In that, if you're a Barnabas, as we are,
Yep.
Pastors need us, and they know they need us, and so that has impacted us in several ways. One, the conversations like we're having today are more and more common because we all have friends. Everyone that's listening and watching, we all have friends that are not in the ministry today because they did not pay attention to their life. They may have paid attention to their doctrine or even their ministry, but not their life or their family. And, Dr. Dilback and I love to share that verse, 1 Timothy 4:16, pay close attention to your life. Right there at the next chapter from the job description, pay close attention to your life and doctrine or teaching. Persevere in these things. For in doing so, you save not only yourself, but your hearers. And this impacted pastoral ministry, pastoral wellness, in that we have everyone's attention. Not only is it these scandalous ministry meltdowns that make it onto the paper about, Hillsong or somebody out there, but it's our friends, and it's even in our lives. And, Lifeway Research did a very recent study at the beginning of this year that asked pastors what their greatest needs were. And when I come to Kentucky for those regional meetings, I'm going to highlight those, but I'll give you a couple of teasers right now.
Right. Thank you.
And I've kind of organized them according to my anecdotal evidence, but I see of those needs that they say they have. that have moved the needle in the last 2 years. The first one's exhaustion, and the second one's frustration, and these are related somehow. But another good thing about this, a different study they had showed that they're not leaving the ministry at a rate different than before the pandemic.
Okay.
That they've never been leaving in droves. Those mythical numbers came about from a straw poll back in the 70s at Fuller Seminary.
Yeah,
but
that's interesting.
Yeah,
and,
so
let's just touch that real quick, and you addressed it here. What's the mythical number? 1,600 pastors. I don't even recall.
Yeah, when you may remember in Nashville, I was living there at the time, and one of the pastor of the largest church, it wasn't Southern Baptist, one of the when he left his ministry, he said it was because he was burnt out, leading on empty. But you find out he also left with his secretary. Yeah. But two of the largest Christian publishers, and I kept those. One led with their headlines were 1,500 a month leaving the ministry. The other one said 1,700 a month. The fact is 1,600. Usually it's 1,500. I've heard it at seminaries. I've read it in books. It's been printed. H.B. London printed it in one of his books, and that's where it got some of the cred. But again, that was before you sourced things. And so Lifeway did a deep dive in Lifeway research in 2015 on attrition and found out, and we dug and dug and dug. And we found out where that came from. It was a straw poll at Fuller Seminary, never meant to be published as research. And so it's never been true that 1,500, it's 250 for different reasons. And to be honest, you and I would be two of those 250.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense.
Because we left the pastorate, but we didn't leave the ministry, and some for admirable reasons, and some for not so good. But the point is, pastors aren't quitters. And they're not sitting around looking for a way out. But they are exhausted because they've been on sprint mode too long, because they've neglected or disobeyed the Sabbath, and for a bunch of other reasons. And they're frustrated because everybody's frustrated. I mean, you can't look on social media or news or anywhere where somebody's not frustrated about politics or pandemic or protest or something. And everybody's upset. And so I'm here in Dallas. We're upset about the Cowboys draft and Texas Rangers pitching. People get mad, and eventually those mad people come to our church, and then some of them stop coming. And so it's just the frustration and the exhaustion. I think it's a temporary season, but I think it's a season that we're in now, and we need to check our pulse.
Great counsel and great information. So when you think about pastoral wellness, you're approaching it from a holistic standpoint: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of it, and probably in financial as well, all of it together. What's some of your best advice for a pastor who just wants to begin pursuing wellness in any or all of these ways?
I love simplicity, and there's no one better that dials things down than Jesus Christ himself. Yeah. When the smartest guy in the room asked him what the most important command was, everybody in the room knew what it was, because they quoted it every morning and every evening, every day of their life, as did their parents and grandparents. Love the Lord your God with all your whole heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. There encompasses pastoral ministry in a nutshell: physical, mental, emotional. I mean, it's all Western thought sometimes compartmentalizes and separates those things. The Gnostics did it in a really even worse way. But the Great Commandments, I think, is my measure for health. And to be honest with you, I was pastoring my first 20 years of pastoring. I had the point where I was burnt out and different. I mean, I could still make decisions. I could still turn the pastor button on where I would be like, hey, how you? I could still preach, but I was different. Yep. I was a jerk. I mean, there weren't any moral meltdowns. I was not in the newspaper for anything stupid, but I just different. And I got some help. I asked my doctor, who was also a church member, and we've been on a couple of mission trips together, and he diagnosed me with clinical depression. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I really don't have time for it, because we're relocating our church,
Yeah, absolutely.
And then a week later, a licensed therapist, also in our church, came by the office, and she had 2 questions for me. My doctor had 6 or 7, about sleep and all that stuff. And but she came by. She had two. She said first one was, do you know that you're clinically depressed? I said, well, I just found out a week ago. So yes, ma'am, I do. And she said, oh, good. And then second thing, are you taking anything for it? I said, well, yeah. I mean, I just picked it up Wednesday, so I don't know if it works, but this is what he gave me. So I put them together and a couple of staff, a couple of lay leaders, and my wife, and they kind of helped me get healthy again. And I continued to serve that church and for 5 more years, and those are honestly the best 5 of my whole ministry.
So, Mark, what are some things that you do now just to continue on a path of just taking care of yourself, make sure that you don't get back in that same hole that you were in before?
Yeah. So, how the Great Commandment helps me on a daily basis is it's basically God's pecking order for my life. So, just like the 10 Commandments bear out, He wants to be first love, and if I get away from Him, I repent. Do what I did at first. It's like it's what I learned in church growing up. Start every day with the Lord. And when the first pastors in history stopped devoting themselves to prayer and the ministry of the word, the church stopped growing because they stopped growing. So if I'm going to grow and help pastors, I've got to keep growing. I've got to keep growing as a Christian. So my walk with the Lord is my top priority. And then, love your neighbor, the second commandment. Neighbor means nearest one. And in my house, it's Janet. So I'm old school. Genesis 2 says, leave your parents, cleave to your wife. Cleave means to pursue hard. I'm going to unpack that with some of the guys in Kentucky next month, and just about everywhere I go, I'll encourage them to pursue their wife. So those 2 relationships are the most important I have every day. And if Jesus and Janet are happy with me, then I don't need the approval of everybody else.
Wow, that's so good. Yeah.
But if they're not, then it doesn't matter how much applause I get, right?
Doesn't matter who's for you. So you're mentioning relationships and first and second commandment. And I've read recently, and this is another one of those unvetted numbers. I know they come from a survey. 70% of pastors say they do not have a close friend. Do you have any thoughts there about why many pastors do not have close friends, and what can they do?
Yeah, here's the thing, and I'm hoping there's still at least 3 or 4 people listening at this point, because I don't want to offend anybody, but if you're lonely, it's your fault. You're surrounded by people. I'm talking to pastors, missionaries, ministers. If you're surrounded by people, then you have people that would do anything to get close to you, and you're the only reason they're not. And they're not just inside the church, outside the church. That's another one of those myths I heard early on in ministry. Don't get close to anybody in your church. How stupid is that? It's my family too. Yeah. And anyway, I don't think that I learned the hard way, Todd, that my wife doesn't need as many friends as I do. I didn't understand the whole introvert extrovert thing. She's a card carrying introvert. She needs a couple of people.
Yep.
And she needs some time to recover after she's with people, right? Absolutely. And half of the people listening are those people, and it's not a disorder. It's just some are energized by people, some aren't. But everyone needs friends, and nobody needs isolation. But it is always on us to pursue friendships. I'm in a brand new city. We've lived here less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I spent Sunday afternoon watching my high school best friend play tennis.
Wow.
I drove 45 minutes to watch him play a tennis match. I'm pursuing friendship, right? And so that's on me. If I don't have any friends here in Dallas, I'm not going to blame the world. I'm going to blame me.
So a man that has friends must show himself friendly. So think about a pastor, Mark, and you understand denominational life, SBC connections, state convention, associations, and then local other pastors in the area. What are some immediate avenues available to any pastor? We just say in Kentucky, if they say, I don't have anybody I can talk to about the challenges I'm going through right now, who are 2 or 3 folks that just from your clear knowledge of state convention work they could quickly call?
Yeah, well, your AMS or DOM, whatever you want to call them, these guys know the pastors really well. They know their spouses many times, and we need to guard also the relationships for our spouse, especially if they have children at home. Make sure they have at least one friend that they're connecting to. That's part of our leadership responsibility. You also have. I love Kentucky Baptists have a great regional strategy. So you have
Yep.
folks that live and work in the regions, so that you don't have to go back to Lexington or somewhere. There are people there that not only will be your friend, but they'll help curate friendships and connect you with people locally, because all the online national friendships are awesome and I thrive on those. But I need some face-to-face, life on life, somebody investing in me. A disciple maker needs to be discipled, right? And
Yep.
so that means somebody's pouring into me that I can at least connect with once a month. I think that's a reasonable goal.
Just find some guys you can sit down and get a cup of coffee with, or a barbecue sandwich, and laugh and make fun of yourself and make fun of each other. It can be life giving. Mark, you're
Yes.
founder of a ministry called Care for Pastors, with the four being the number four. Care number four pastors. Tell us about that. What's it about, and how can folks be involved?
It's fairly new. I just made some friends at 7 years ago at Lifeway, started making friends that also serve pastors. And honestly, Care for Pastors, just a bunch of Barnabases, state, uh, regional, or associational. Some are Baptist, some are non-Baptist, some are in the seminary world, some are in the research world, some are state conventions or networks. But if they're cheering on pastors, somebody needs to cheer them on. And so we just have a summit, biennial every other year. We'll have one in Kansas City next year. We've had 3 so far. And basically we swap ideas and encouragement, sometimes collaborate on things, but it's not an organization that you have to join or pay fees. It's just basically a network of Barnabases is what it is.
So you'd mentioned wanting to strengthen relationships with seminaries, that seminaries could go a long way in helping pastors develop good self-care habits. Um, how are you going about that? How do you hope to connect with? We have 6 Southern Baptist seminaries in the states. How do you
Yeah.
hope to connect with them?
Well, I graduated from Southwestern and Southern, but I'm not an academician, and I'm not. It's not false humility. I'm just not. And yet, every seminary plus Canada has invited me to do at least one event. Some of them a handful of events, and I wondered why at first. When we did a lot of those were Lifeway. Some of them weren't. But what I realized is what you said at the beginning of this is that they started to realize that that we weren't preparing, or they needed help preparing these ministry leaders for life.
Yeah.
And they connect with Joe Pastor more than sometimes the academic, because to your point, this being prepared not only for your life, but also your doctrine. They've got the doctrine part covered. Almost nobody's leaving the ministry because of doctrinal issues. It's the life issues. And so the seminaries are very open and eager to partner with anybody. They don't care which organization, as long as you do it well, that can help cheer on their ministers. And so a lot of what we're doing is marriage. My wife and I started doing marriage events after going to Lifeway. I've been a pastor for 27 years at that point and never done a marriage event. And now we've done over 100 of them,
Wow.
only for ministry couples. We don't do them for churches because we don't have time. But the absolute interest, that one of the first ones was yours. Kentucky Baptist Convention invited us. It was one of the first we did that was a retreat. And you guys,
Shepherding the shepherd.
oh my stars, you guys are phenomenal. And a lot can learn from you, because some will only do it every few years because they save up their money. But in my opinion, the fact that you guys work with a corporate sponsor like a hospital or something means that you can bless these ministry couples, and you do a fantastic job with it.
Well, thank you for that. And by the way, if Godstone ever wants to invest financially in our shepherding the shepherd, it's a great. We do it every year. It administers to a lot of couples. And Mark, thank you for participating in that. I would say this. So this week is Great Commission Week at Southern Seminary here in Louisville. They had Dr. Chitwood in yesterday at chapel, and then to speak with students, they have Kevin Ezell in tomorrow. They brought KBC in today, kind of in the middle. But there's a guy over there we'd love to connect you with. I think could sure help if you're not already connected, can make that help that work It's kind of like
Yes.
helping students think about wellness is a little bit like premarital counseling. They're not going to pay that much attention to it while they're in seminary, but boy, they're gonna need it when they get started leading churches and might
Yes.
remember some things that they heard. Well,
Amen.
what are one or two things that you would just say to pastors and church leaders that they could do just to stay vibrant in their role?
Just keep pursuing your wife.
Yeah.
If you have preschoolers at home, you cannot do it like you did it before kids and what like you'll do it afterwards. And so, don't be discouraged when it gets hard, but don't stop doing it because I have a lot of friends and family that get all the way to the 25th anniversary
Yeah.
and they're surprised when the last kid leaves and there's no marriage left. And it happens to pastors all the time. So pursue Jesus every day, pursue your wife every day, even in small ways. And your ministry will indirectly and sometimes directly be blessed because our ministry will never be stronger than our marriage. And we're discipling them in the way that we treat our wife. And all these things, pastors. I'm just reminding you what you already know, but it's not that hard to be a great commandment pastor. Just love the Lord and love the people, starting with your closest, nearest neighbor, and also to the neighbor who lives right next door and across the street from you and around the world.
Mark, I just got to tell you, 30 years of Christian ministry, that's some of the best advice I've ever heard is to pursue your wife. And the most natural relationship for a ministry leader is your spouse. And boy, just building that relationship is just going to reap dividends of joy for hopefully many, many years to come. So you've already mentioned you're going to be in Kentucky, 4 dates, I think the end of May. And folks go to kybaptist.org to learn more or to register. And I think you're kind of giving us a kind of a good commercial for you being here. Anything else you want to say to those who might be thinking about whether or not they should attend? Why should they make time for this gathering?
Because we're going to have a good time. And this is going to be a little more conversational than it is presentational. So if you think I'm going to come up there with some slick presentation, forget it. Some of you know me already. I'm a bow hunter. Kentucky's one of the best places in the world to live, to fish and to hunt. And I can't wait to see you there. And I guarantee I know Kentucky Baptist enough to know that we're going to eat well when we get there also.
You just gained some supporters right there with the bow hunting. All right, so real quick, what's one thing about you that others may not? You already told us you're a bow hunter. Something else about you that others may not know.
Well, I guess it would be that I was discipled by Leonard Ravenhill when I was a teenager.
Wow.
And that might surprise people as a Southern Baptist kid. It was very unintentional on my part, but he was a neighbor, and I got to be part of his prayer meetings and Bible studies on Friday nights for a couple of years. And that answers another question you had, which is your favorite author. And because of my friendship with him, he's also my favorite author. So
your favorite book of his? I have one in mind, but I'm just wondering.
I think Why Revival Tarries might be my favorite one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a compilation of Ian Bounds, though, which is right up there at the top.
That book just has a resurgence. I think it's having kind of a resurgence even right now. One leadership principle, you may have already told it to us, but one leadership principle that you try to live by, Mark.
Yeah, I think I already told it. I'm just going to stick with, your ministry will never be stronger than your marriage. So, pay attention to your life and to your marriage, and I think your ministry will be blessed.
If Jesus and Janet are satisfied with your life and ministry, then it's probably going to be okay from what I hear you saying.
It's my experience. Yes.
Brother, I'm grateful that you are part of God's Stone and that you're serving there with Dr. Dilbeck. He is a blessed, and you are as well.
Amen.
I just can't imagine how the many ways that God's going to use you to help Southern Baptists and Kentucky Baptists. Thank you for your ministry, and thank you for taking the time to join on Leadership Lessons.
Thank you so much for inviting me.